It was still dark when Jamal Carter stepped out of his ground-floor apartment in South Haven. Cold wind slipped through the cracks of old brick walls, whistling between rusted iron window frames. The city hadn't quite awakened, but the street where he lived had never slept. The wail of police sirens, a neighbor's radio playing an old news broadcast, the sound of damp shoes stepping across cracked concrete, all wove together into a sound that could only be called poverty. Jamal wore a dark blue suit, old but carefully pressed. It was the one suit he had preserved for 2 years, one he had worn only on occasions he believed might change his life. His tie was neatly knotted. His wrist shimmered with silver, the cufflinks from his grandfather, wrapped carefully in a lavender-scented handkerchief and mailed by his mother just the week before. "A little extra confidence for you," she had written in the letter enclosed. As he crossed the neighborhood, Jamal passed a group of men standing outside a convenience store. They fell silent when they saw him. One white man in a hoodie smirked. Wearing a suit this early, court open already. No one laughed, but their eyes, or more precisely the way they looked right through him, spoke louder than words. Jamal was used to that. Black, tall, wearing a suit, in a poor neighborhood. No one thought he was looking for a job. They only thought headed to court, or just got out of jail. He tightened his grip on the leather strap of his case. Inside were his resume, his credentials, and the market research report he had spent countless sleepless nights preparing. They couldn't shield him from the city's scrutiny, but at the very least, they reminded him he belonged wherever he was going. The street light at the corner blinked, casting his shadow long across the sidewalk. In the blurred glow of dawn, he looked like a ghost walking through a city that refused to speak his name. A police car cruised slowly by. The officers didn't look at him, but Jamal instinctively lowered his gaze, straightened his back, and kept his steps steady. A reflex people like him learned early in life don't give them a reason to think you've done something wrong. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Mom. You may not come from a good place, but you are the best thing that ever came from it. Keep walking, Jamal. The world will have to look back." He swallowed the rising emotion, slipped the phone away, and kept moving. In the distance, the Langston and Reeve building began to take shape through the fog. Opportunity stood at the end of the road. But this city had never let someone like him reach a dream without a fight. And Jamal didn't know. Today would be the day that redefined everything. Chicago that morning felt like it was holding something just beneath the surface, something waiting to explode. The air was thick. The sky had darkened. Clouds loomed overhead as if they had gathered all night to pour down on those too slow to run. Jamal stepped out of the Monroe Street train station, his freshly shined shoes clicking against the dew-covered concrete. He took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and clutched the folder under his arm. The towering Langston and Reeve Capitol building glinted faintly in the distance like a giant crystal planted in the heart of the city. His interview was at 9 a.m. It was only 8:20. Still time. He could stroll confidently, maintaining the most professional version of himself. But this city waited for no one. A drop of rain fell. Cold. Sharp. Then a second. A third, until thousands of droplets came crashing down like the sky had lost its temper. People scattered, covering their heads and pulling out their phones to call for rides. Men in suits sprinted toward the nearest coffee shops. A woman shrieked as her umbrella flipped inside out. Car horns blared in chaos. Jamal blinked, forcing himself to stay calm. He quickly slipped under the narrow awning of a small bakery, pressing his back against the cold brick wall. His leather case was soaked at one corner. He hurriedly opened his coat, tucked the case inside, holding it to his chest like it was his heart. The documents inside were still dry. He only needed to keep them that way. They were his future. He pulled out his phone, his fingers slipping on the wet screen, opened the ride-hailing app. No drivers available in your area. Refreshed. Still nothing. The spinning wheel kept turning, then showed a connection error. He clenched his jaw. This rain hadn't been in the forecast. Even if it had, for someone from South Haven like him, being late because of the weather was never an acceptable excuse. They didn't forgive the inconveniences of black men. Then a flash of hope. A yellow cab pulled up about 30 meters away, red tail lights glowing, one door left open. Someone stepped out. Jamal bolted, one hand raised to wave the other, gripping the case tightly. Taxi. I was here first. But a white man in a camel-colored trench coat stepped out from behind and shoved Jamal aside as if he wasn't there. No apology, no glance. The man walked straight into the cab and shut the door. The driver sped off the back wheels, splashing dirty water onto Jamal's trousers. Frozen in the middle of the street, Jamal clenched his fists and tilted his head to the sky in silence. His chest heaved, not from being wet, not from losing the cab, but from rage building up inside him with nowhere to go. He knew that if he yelled just once, someone would record it, and tomorrow's headline would be, "Black Man Causes Disturbance in Financial District." This world didn't allow him to be angry. He was only allowed to endure in silence. Jamal exhaled slowly, left the anger on the sidewalk. He pulled out a crumpled tissue from his pocket, wiped his face, and continued walking into the downpour. His soaked shoes made wet, squelching sounds with every step. His once crisp slacks now clung to his skin. Water dripped from his hair. His tie was askew. His white shirt was spotted with mud, but he kept walking head low. Because that building was still there, glowing through the rain like a mirage, and whatever happened, he was going to reach it. Even if they would look at him as if he didn't belong, even if the sky itself seemed to be working against him. He didn't yet know that just a few minutes from now, an unexpected decision on a quiet street corner would change the entire story. Not because of fate, but because of the kindness offered when no one was watching. A distant thunder cracked. The rain hadn't stopped, but the wind had grown stronger. Fallen leaves skated low across the pavement like fragments of a dream blown apart. Jamal pulled his collar tighter, trying to shield the folder tucked inside his now soaked coat. Every step now felt like dragging 1,000 pounds of water. But he kept walking. Not because he still believed, but because there was no other way. As he neared the intersection of Madison and Halsted, something unusual made him stop. A sleek black luxury car was parked crooked on the side of the road. Rain beat against the car's body, blurring it like scratched glass. The rear right tire was completely flat, causing the whole vehicle to tilt to one side. Behind it, an older man, perhaps in his 70s, silver-haired, wearing a light gray suit, was kneeling on the curb, hands trembling as he held a jack under the tire. The thin umbrella above his head flapped in the wind, barely offering any cover. The cuff of his white shirt was already stained with muddy rainwater. The jack kept slipping on the slick concrete. Each time he tried to reposition it, it collapsed again. Jamal froze. Just a few steps away. One direction, the Langston and Reeve building, slowly glowing into view, his chance at a new life. The other, a stranger struggling with a flat tire in a storm. And no one else stopped. Not a soul. Someone passing by glanced at the older man, then turned away, pulling their coat tighter. A white couple walked by on the other side of the street. The woman glanced at the scene, then tugged her boyfriend forward as if afraid to get involved. The luxury car, the expensive suit, someone probably thought serves him right. Rich people should know how to take care of themselves. Jamal stood there soaked cold, his heart pounding as he wrestled in silence. If he stopped, he'd surely be late. And people like him, a black man from South Haven with no backup plan, only got one chance. One. Just keep walking, a voice in his head urged. You're not obligated to save the world. You've already had enough on your shoulders. But then another voice, deeper, more familiar, echoing from far away. His mother's voice. You don't help people when it's convenient. You help them when you still have it in you to be a person. Jamal blinked. A drop traced down his cheek, unclear if it was rain or something else. He sighed, then turned and walked toward the car. Sir, let me help you. The older man looked up, startled. There was clear caution in his voice. I think I've got it. It's just the jack. The pavement's too slick. The jack won't grip, Jamal replied gently. He set his case on the back seat, then shrugged off his coat and laid it down on the muddy ground. No hesitation. You shouldn't be kneeling like this in the rain. I'm used to this kind of thing. The wind howled, making the older man pause. His eyes locked onto the gesture, a young man dark-skinned, kneeling in the rain, bare hands reaching for the jack. No questions. No need for gratitude. Help. Jamal didn't speak much. His hands moved swiftly, resetting the jack to the right leverage point. Those summers helping his uncle at the garage back in South Haven had left their mark. This wasn't an old Toyota. It was a brand new Bentley. But the mechanics were familiar. The older man stood beside him, breathing heavily. You know what you're doing. Not everyone could handle this. Jamal smiled. I don't have a car of my own. But I was taught if you want to drive someone else's, you better at least know how to change a tire. It was half a joke, but it made the older man pause. Something flickered in his eyes, something unfamiliar. Maybe respect. Neither of them said anything more. Jamal finished the change, tightened the bolts, and checked everything twice, then stood wiping his hands on his soaked trousers. All done, sir. You're good to go. The older man looked at him as if trying to see into his soul. What's your name? Jamal hesitated slightly. Jamal Carter. A brief silence. Then the older man extended his hand. I'm Edward. Thank you, Jamal. They shook hands. The older man's hand was cold and trembling. Jamal's was wet, but steady. Neither of them knew that this handshake in the middle of a storm would be the first time a door was unlocked. Not because either of them expected what was coming, but because they had chosen to do the right thing even when no one was watching. The Bentley pulled away slowly, new tire spraying water into the air. Jamal stood on the sidewalk, drenched and silent. He checked his watch, 8:52. 8 minutes to go. The Langston and Reeve building was now only a few blocks away. He ran. No thoughts, no calculations. Just the knowing if there was even a sliver of hope left, he had to take it. Rain slapped his face. His clothes clung to his skin like a freezing shell. His leather shoes were soaked, slapping loudly against the slick pavement. His folder stayed tucked inside his coat, held like treasure. Inside were sleepless nights, memorized numbers, and a recommendation letter from the only professor who had ever called him the sharpest analytical mind I've ever taught. 8:59. He crossed the final intersection, breathing hard, chest on fire. Standing before the Langston and Reeve Tower, he drew in a deep breath and stepped inside. The glass doors spun open, revealing a completely different world. No more musty smell of South Haven. This place smelled of expensive cologne, polished wood, and power. The ceiling stretched high, sparkling chandeliers overhead. His shoes left tiny puddles on the marble floor. Every step echoed as if it didn't belong. The man in the gray suit standing behind the security desk looked up. His expression shifted the moment he saw Jamal. Not curiosity, suspicion. "Can I help you?" The tone was clipped cold. Jamal stood tall, drew a breath. "I'm Jamal Carter. I have a 9 a.m. interview with the finance department." The guard glanced at his watch. 9:01. Then silently he checked the tablet. When he found the name, he nodded, but paused. "You're late." "I know." Jamal swallowed. There was an issue outside. "But I made it. I'm just asking to go up and see them." The guard looked him over. The white shirt is now gray from the rain. Wrinkled collar, crooked tie, mud-stained trousers, shoes no longer shining. And the folder, the one thing still holding its shape, now frayed at the corners, its edges beginning to curl. He didn't say no, but the way his eyes drifted away said enough. "You can try going up, but I'm not promising anything." Jamal nodded softly, thanked him, and walked past the lobby. People passing by sped up slightly, as if he might somehow dirty the air. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit whispered to his friend, "Probably maintenance or a courier." Jamal didn't look back. He'd heard comments like that his entire life. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The mirror reflected someone even he barely recognized. Soaked hair, weary face, trembling hands. But in the eyes, there was still fire. Floor 14. The doors opened. Jamal stepped out onto the dark wood floor. His shoes made an awful squelching sound. He approached the reception desk. A blonde woman in a gray blazer looked up. For a second, surprise flashed across her face. Then, like a machine, her features reset to a professional calm. "Hello? I'm Jamal Carter. I have a 9 a.m. interview with Mr. Calloway." She glanced at the wall clock, 9:18. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Carter. Mr. Calloway has moved on to the next candidate. His schedule is extremely tight." Jamal's hand tightened around his case. He nodded. "I understand. I want to leave my folder, so if anyone ever looks, they'll know I tried." He opened the case and pulled out a résumé with slightly wet edges still legible. He offered it with both hands. She took it. Her gaze softened a little. "I'll make sure it gets to the right person." A brief silence. Jamal nodded in thanks, turned away. He strolled toward the elevator. Each step heavier than the last, weighed down by the question pounding in his head, "I did the right thing. So why does it feel like I lost everything?" His back was soaked. It felt like the whole world was standing warm inside that tower, and had shut the door on him alone. The elevator doors opened. Jamal stepped inside, standing tall, eyes on the mirror. Staring back was a black man soaked late underestimated, but not bowed. The doors closed. He didn't yet know what was waiting above these upper floors. The elevator returned Jamal to the ground floor lobby where every dream was inspected before being granted passage. When the steel doors slid open, the cold overhead light flooded in, making him squint. The pounding in his chest from the frantic sprint had faded. All that remained was the steady drip of water falling from his pant cuffs onto the marble floor, each drop echoing like a cruel reminder. You didn't make it. The reception hall remained as quietly elegant as it had been when he first entered, but now it seemed to look at him with something colder than indifference. Perhaps pity. Or worse, contempt. He stood there for a few seconds, his hand tightening around the leather handle of his case. It was over. No one would call. No one would ask why he was late. No one cared about a soaked black man from South Haven walking into this place, not on time, not dressed right, not fitting the mold. Jamal walked toward the glass doors. His shoes made a wet, squelching sound with every step. A white man in an Armani suit passed by, visibly grimacing, then veered to the side as if Jamal were a stain tarnishing this expensive space. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight peeked through the layered gray clouds, reflecting on the wet streets like a shattered mirror. He paused, one hand on the glass, staring at the street. Years of effort, sleepless nights buried in books, endless moments pushing past condescending glances, dismissive teachers, skeptical recruiters, even strangers on the city bus who shifted away without thinking. All of it had led to this morning, and now this city, the same eyes had slammed the door in his face because he hadn't arrived on time, because he'd stopped to help someone, because he was who he was. A soft vibration in his pocket interrupted the spiral. His phone lit up with a familiar name, Mom calling. Jamal inhaled sharply, not ready to answer. He wasn't ready to say, "I failed Mama." He didn't know how to explain the pain of choosing kindness over ambition, and losing both. After a few rings, the call ended. Almost instantly, a second call came through. Unknown number. Chicago area code. Jamal frowned, his hand trembling slightly as he accepted the call. "Hello." His voice was hoarse, barely steady. "Hello, is this Jamal Carter?" A crisp, poised female voice. "This is Natalie Quinn, executive assistant to Mr. Edward Langston." Jamal stood upright. It couldn't be real. His heartbeat tightened in his chest. "I'm sorry. Did you say Mr. Langston?" As in Edward Langston, CEO of Langston and Reeve. "Yes," Natalie replied evenly. "Mr. Langston would like to invite you for a private meeting today at 2 p.m. in the executive office, 82nd floor. Jamal didn't speak. He stared out at the street as if the world had flipped upside down. The rain had passed, but inside him, a storm still raged unnamed. I'll be there," he said almost in a whisper. "Excellent. We look forward to meeting you, Mr. Carter." The call ended. He stood still, heart-pounding, phone in hand, like he was afraid he might drop the dream all over again. A security guard walked by, unaware of the subtle shift in Jamal's expression, not wet with rain now, but glowing with something he dared not name, hope. Jamal didn't know why, didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The interview he thought he had lost. It might only be the beginning. And this time, he wouldn't be walking in with a perfect suit or polished confidence, but as a real person. Flawed, soaked in effort. and someone who had chosen to help another human being even when no one was watching. Because maybe, just maybe, that's what opened the door. Not the resume, not the GPA, not a catchy name, but the fact that he acted when no one was supposed to. At 1:17 p.m., a yellow cab pulled up outside the Langston and Reeve Capitol building. The sky was clear now, the air crisp, but puddles still dotted the street, remnants of a storm that had just passed. Jamal stepped out, walking neither hurriedly nor slowly. His old Navy suit had been dried and freshly pressed with his mother's steam iron. His leather shoes, still scuffed from the morning's rain, had been polished as best he could, gleaming under the sun. His leather case, the symbol of all he carried, was tucked firmly under his arm. And on his wrist, the silver cufflinks from his grandfather shimmered quietly in the daylight. Walking through the lobby once more, Jamal was no longer the trembling, soaked, underestimated man from that morning. Nothing had changed except everything inside him. He was someone who had walked through disappointment and remained standing. This time, the security guard asked no questions. He glanced at the name on his list, nodded, and handed Jamal a black card with a gold edge, a special pass. 82nd floor, executive office. His tone wasn't cold, not doubtful, just protocol. Jamal made his way toward the executive elevator, a place no one from the lower levels even dreamed of entering. The mirrored walls, soft carpet, and laser-etched buttons made every second feel like it was holding its breath. The doors closed. Jamal stared at his reflection. Not just skin color, not just a worn-out suit, but the eyes no longer searching for acceptance, but ready to face whatever truth lay ahead. 82nd floor. The doors opened. What lay beyond was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing a miniature version of Chicago below. Sunlight poured in, dancing across the walnut floors and gilding everything in soft gold. A woman in a navy blazer with high-tied brown hair approached him. "Mr. Jamal Carter." Her voice was firm and polite. "Yes, that's me. I'm Natalie Quinn, Mr. Langston's executive assistant. Please have a seat. He'll be with you shortly." She gestured to a nearby seating area, soft leather chairs, a glass table, and a single fresh flower in the center. Nothing excessive, nothing missing, just the quiet power of balance. "Would you like some water or coffee?" "Water would be great." "Thank you." Moments later, she returned with a tall glass of chilled water. On the table, sunlight from the window refracted into a prismatic swirl, a sight Jamal had never seen in South Haven. The tap water came out cloudy. He sat, fingertips lightly resting on the glass. His palms were still damp with sweat. His heart raced, not from fear, but from not knowing what lay beyond that door. He remembered the morning. His grease-stained hands lifted the jack in the storm. The older man's face was tired but enduring. The feeling of having lost everything, and the lobby door closed in silence, only to open again. Higher this time. The double doors at the end of the hall creaked open. Natalie stepped out. Her voice calm but confident. "Mr. Langston is ready for you. Please go in." Jamal rose, drew a deep breath, clutched his worn folder, no longer pristine, but carrying every piece of his journey. He walked toward the door. Each step a question. Why am I here? Is this just a polite way of rejecting me in person? Or did they see something I've spent my whole life trying to prove? He didn't know, but he knew this. Whatever happened, he would not apologize for being himself. The door opened fully, and there, standing with his back to him, looking out over the city skyline, was a man. Gray suit, silver hair, and shoulders trembling slightly like someone remembering something important. He turned around, and Jamal froze, eyes wide, breath caught. He was gripping his case now, trembling. Edward Langston, the very same man he had helped in the rain that morning. Not fate, not a coincidence, but a return of a choice once thought to be a mistake, now revealed to be the right thing he'd ever done in his life. The room was large but not ostentatious. Every piece of furniture spoke of restraint and precision. Dark oak wood, a wide desk with no unnecessary ornament and lighting, just bright enough to illuminate a face, without ever forcing someone to bow their head. Jamal stood at the threshold, still holding his worn briefcase tightly. Across from him was Edward Langston, no longer the flustered older man caught in the rain, but a man whose presence exuded the kind of power forged over decades. The sunlight through the glass behind him caught the silver in his hair, making it shimmer as if it were lined with gold. Jamal Carter. He spoke slowly, each syllable clear. Then he extended his hand. "It's good to see you again, this time in drier conditions." Jamal stepped forward and took his hand. This time not in the middle of a rainy street, but between two men who understood the weight of an unnamed gratitude. "I had no idea," Jamal began, but Edward raised a hand gently. "You don't need to explain anything. The fact that you didn't know who I was, that's what made this morning truly meaningful." A quiet pause. Edward walked around his desk and sat gracefully in the leather chair, his fingers interlaced on the table. He motioned for Jamal to take the seat across from him. The young man from South Haven sat quietly, but his back remained straight, as if his very spine had learned if you want to be seen as human, you must stand tall first. "Did you know," Edward began, voice low and steady, 58 years ago, I stood outside a building much like this one. Rental suit, borrowed shoes, late to the interview. No one gave me a chance, except for one man." He opened a drawer and pulled out Jamal's briefcase. Its corners still puffed from the rain, the edges slightly peeling, but it sat neatly before him as if it held something precious. "You left this in the back seat of my car," Edward said with a small smile. "And I read it. Every single page." Jamal swallowed hard. A flood of emotion rose within him. Embarrassment, gratitude, disbelief. He had once wondered if anyone would see value in that soggy pile of pages. Now here he was in front of the one man who had read it not just with his eyes, but with belief. Your Southeast Asia market analysis, sharp, current, and full of perspective. But what struck me more was your cover letter. You weren't trying to prove anything. You told the story of the road you walked. Edward paused. His tone softened. "And then I thought back to that moment you laid your coat down, knelt on the street, and changed my tire in a soaked suit with minutes left until your interview. No cameras, no witnesses, no reward. You helped because it was the right thing to do." Jamal lifted his head. For the first time in years, he didn't have to defend his kindness. Edward looked him in the eyes. "I don't need another analyst who only sees numbers. I need someone who, when given a choice between selfishness and integrity, will choose what's right even when no one is watching." Jamal opened his mouth, voice trembling. I never thought I'd hear someone say that to me." Edward smiled gently, and I never thought I'd see another version of myself standing in the morning rain. He stood. Jamal, I'm not offering you an internship or an entry-level analyst role. I'm offering you the position of special assistant to the CEO. You'll walk into rooms most people never even get to see. You'll observe, learn, and prove that strength doesn't come from where you're born. The room fell into silence. The words dropped between them like a contract written in truth. Jamal sat still. Inside him waves, gratitude, doubt, the question of whether he was worthy. But deeper than all that was the feeling that someone had finally seen him not through his skin color, not through his resume, but through his actions in silence. He looked at Edward and nodded. I'm ready. And for the first time in years, Jamal smiled a smile not to win favor, but to say to himself, you didn't give up. And that's enough to begin again. When Jamal stepped out of the office on the 82nd floor, everything seemed to slow down. His feet still moved, but his mind floated somewhere between two worlds, the one he had just closed behind a heavy wooden door, and the one now opening in front of him. He didn't remember exactly what he said after I'm ready. It all unfolded like a tidal wave. Mr. Langston had spoken about a mentorship program, one designed for individuals chosen for their character, not just their metrics, trained directly under the company's highest leadership. Jamal remembered one line clearly: I can't teach you ethics, but I can teach you how to turn ethics into power. Then Edward handed him a sleek black access card. On it, engraved in subtle silver, EL. It wasn't a staff ID. It was trust. As the elevator took him back down to street level, Jamal realized there was no music to mark the turning of his life, no grand announcement, just a quiet afternoon, sunlight filtering through glass, and the same shirt he'd worn that morning, now dry-ironed with hope and perseverance. At the lobby, Natalie, the executive assistant, stood waiting. Mr. Carter. Yes, Mr. Langston asked me to return this to you. She handed him a familiar object, the old leather briefcase he had left in the car, thinking he was just another man who missed his chance. It had been cleaned, its frayed edges hand-stitched with care, every seam precise. He said Natalie added with a small smile, "Don't let the outside fool anyone about what's inside." Jamal bowed slightly. "Thank you for this and for calling me back." Natalie tilted her head, her gaze carrying a quiet knowing. Not everyone gets called back. But you were seen, Mr. Carter, and that's rare. Jamal stepped out of the building. He no longer looked up at the tower like he had that morning. Now he walked as if he were part of it. On his way home, he checked his phone. A message from his mother. "Are you okay? I just have a feeling. Today is special." He paused on the sidewalk. The sun shone on his face, still damp with sweat and the residue of a former life. He typed slowly, word by word. "Mama, today. I met a storm, but I didn't drown. I was seen." He sent the message and looked up. The clouds that had loomed gray that morning had now scattered, revealing a clear, open sky. A young black boy in a school uniform passed by carrying a tattered economics book wrapped in clear tape. He paused, looked Jamal up and down, then smiled a shy, genuine smile like he had recognized something in Jamal he'd seen before. Jamal smiled back, no words needed, because he knew. Once you are seen, others like you can be seen too. not because they shout, but because someone somewhere left the door open from the inside. That day, Jamal didn't return home feeling victorious. He returned knowing he had touched something no one could ever take away recognition from someone who saw his heart, not just his paperwork. And he understood this was not the finish line. It was simply the first time. He had stepped into the real life that was always meant to be his. Weeks later, Jamal Carter was no longer the young man from South Haven just going to an interview. He was now the special assistant to Edward Langston, the most powerful CEO in the Midwest's financial sector. Not everyone at the company understood why a young black man who didn't graduate from an Ivy League school and didn't bear the last name of a prominent family like Reeve or Vanderbilt was allowed into meetings typically reserved for senior executives. But it was precisely that his presence in spaces where no one expected him that made Jamal the center of everyone's gaze. Not because he was loud, but because he quietly existed where no one believed he belonged. On his first day as he entered the company's strategic leadership boardroom, a white vice president muttered, "So we're bringing in interns from community college now." Jamal didn't respond. Edward gave the man a single look, just enough to silence him. Later, during a market analysis meeting, Jamal quietly presented a detailed chart that analyzed the Southeast Asian supply chain Edward had once mentioned in passing. The executives were stunned. No one expected the young assistant to understand things that deeply. Edward said only one line. "He's not here to serve coffee. He's here to help us see further." But Jamal knew that knowledge alone wasn't enough to make him belong. He had to do more than just be good. He arrived earlier than anyone, left later than most. Each night, when the elevator held only him and the janitorial staff, he would stay behind and meticulously write notes on everything he observed during meetings. He never called himself special. He only knew that someone's trust paid for every minute in that building, and he would never devalue it. But silence couldn't always shield him from scrutiny. One time, as he entered the elevator with 3 white employees, one of them whispered loud enough for Jamal to hear, "I guess he's part of the company's diversity initiative." It was a compliment with a dagger tip. A phrase wrapped in the sugar of progress but meant to belittle. Jamal smiled. And the next day, when Edward cited Jamal's proposal on ethical financial strategy before the executive board, every pair of eyes turned to him, this time with no sarcasm. Because now, his presence no longer needed defending. It had earned its voice. One evening after a long meeting, Edward called Jamal into his office. He was gazing out the tall window, city lights spilling across the glass like a river of fire. "Jamal," he said without turning, "do you know why I bring you into all these rooms?" "To learn," Jamal answered softly. Edward turned to face him. "Not just to learn. I want people to learn from you." Jamal was taken aback. He had never thought of himself as someone others could learn from. Edward walked over, placing a thoughtful hand on his shoulder. "You're not in those rooms to prove anything. You're there to preserve something. You're a reminder. That ethics is not a luxury in business. It's the foundation. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you breathe slower." In this world, Edward continued, where the loudest person in the room often makes decisions. I need someone who knows how to be quiet at the right moment and act when no one's watching. Jamal left the office that night, not with pride, but with weight. Because now he knew he wasn't just living a new life. He was protecting something for those who would come after him. Those who had also been doubted, dismissed, and asked why they wore a suit in a poor neighborhood. And one day, when another young man came in from the rain with a worn portfolio and eyes that carried years of rejection, Jamal would be the first to open the door. No one would need to tell him to do it, because he had once stood outside, and now he held the key. 6 months into the role, Jamal had grown used to the stairs, but now they no longer made him falter, because he had learned the most essential truth while walking the cold corridors of Langston and Reeve Capital. The quiet presence of someone who chooses right can be more powerful than any speech. One rainy Monday morning, not as stormy as the day of his interview, but just gray enough to make the city feel dull, Jamal entered the main lobby like any other day. Now he carried an executive badge with access to floors that even his former interviewers had never seen. As he scanned his card at the turnstile, his eyes landed on a young man sitting in the waiting area. White shirt, slightly wrinkled. Shoes clean but scuffed. Suit too loose. In his lap, a wet folder. He was dabbing at the edges with a handkerchief. Nervous face trying to stay composed. No one noticed him. The security guard nodded off behind the screen. The receptionist was on the phone, and the people walking past barely saw him, as if he were invisible. Jamal stopped. The young man looked up. 2 black men, 2 generations. One looked part recognition, part caution. Jamal smiled, then walked over. "Got an interview?" he asked gently. Yeah, the young man stammered. 9 o'clock. HR 12th floor. I'm Malik. I was a bit late. Bus broke down. Jamal didn't ask more. He just nodded, then turned toward the receptionist's desk. "Excuse me," he said politely but firmly. "Candidate Malik is here. Please notify HR that he's arrived. If anyone needs confirmation, send it from me. Jamal Carter, Executive Office, 82nd floor." The receptionist looked up momentarily surprised, then nodded. Malik stared at him confused. "You are?" Jamal just smiled and gently tapped Malik's shoulder. His voice softened. "Just someone who once sat in your exact spot. A little wetter." That afternoon, Edward Langston stepped into his office and found Jamal standing at the window again. He said nothing, just watched the cars crawl below through the drizzle. Edward approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You still remember that rain, don't you?" Jamal nodded. "I think. I always will." "Good," Edward said. "Don't forget. Because one day, someone else will stand in the rain, and they'll need to see someone made it through." That night, Jamal returned to South Haven. He stopped by his mother's old apartment. She was folding clothes, listening to the news on the radio, as always. He placed 2 things on the table: a signed contract from Langston and Reeve, and a small velvet box inside the same silver cufflinks now polished like new. "Keep these for me, Mom," he said. She looked up, eyes glistening. "You're still my boy," she whispered. "But now, I see a man the world can't ignore." Days later, in the 12th floor hallway, a young man named Malik stepped out of his interview, his face radiant. In his hand, a temporary employee badge. He looked around, hoping to find someone to share it with. But Jamal wasn't there. Only morning light streamed through the glass, casting Malik's reflection across the floor. He smiled. Because he knew. Some people open doors, then quietly step aside, so others can walk through without needing permission. This story didn't end in triumph. It ended with a door once shut, now opened from within. When no one sees you, still do what's right, because someday, that very choice will make the world stop and look.